Hi guys, I'm Maria and I talk about America and its place in the world, even though borders are random and existentially meaningless. I was in Florida for almost 3 weeks working on something that I'm really excited about. I don't really want to go into it further right now because I don't want to jinx it, which is pretty ironic considering that today we're going to be talking about logic again. I got a couple of really positive responses to the last logical fallacies video I made, so if you are someone who watched that and you're back to watch this one,
thank you.
Given the fact that every single one of us who has social media essentially logs into our own little tailor-made echo chamber every day, it's kind of necessary to be as intentional as we can about pursuing logic and reason. Otherwise, it's a little too easy to just fall victim to our little virtual echo chambers, to believe that our algorithm represents the majority of thoughts and opinions out there, instead of the reality, which is that our algorithms represent a small minority of perspectives that have been curated to reflect our own beliefs and preferences. But social media echo chambers are definitely another topic for another day. Today, I'm a little bit more interested in the leaps that we take in order to reinforce our beliefs or to form our beliefs in the first place, along with the rational steps that we can and should take in order to make sure that the arguments we use to form our belief system are logically sound, and that the way we communicate our belief system to others is as logically sound as possible. Yeah, that's why I want to talk about what I want to talk about today. You know, obviously with everything being a heated discussion. I just think it's a valid thing to talk about, so let's just dive in. So the first fallacy that I want to talk about today is one that I think we're all very familiar with, whether we realize it or not, and that's circular reasoning. So circular reasoning is basically the act of repeating an assumption or belief that you already stated as though it's justification for the original thing you stated. It's using the original belief as an argument to defend that belief. It's essentially using an opinion to defend itself. The thing about circular reasoning is that it can be really easy to miss, especially if it's being used in a situation where you're already kind of inclined to agree with the argument being made. It's the act of using the premise as the conclusion and vice versa. For example, as an immigrant, I've heard this circular argument countless times. America is the greatest country in the world because it's better than every other country. This claim just repeats and rewords the initial opinion, framing the second part of the statement as a supporting argument when in reality it's just circular. It's just reiterating what you said. The kind of unfortunate truth is that circular reasoning is both a popular and effective tool because repetition is one of the most popular rhetorical tools out there. It's used time and time again in speeches and debates at pretty much every level of society. If you're already inclined to believe the opinion that's being stated, circular reasoning becomes easier to accept. The second fallacy we're going to talk about today is actually one of my favorites because I think it's one of the most interesting, and if I'm being honest, it's definitely one that I've used many times. It's called the appeal to hypocrisy, and it's one that we see all the time, especially in the friggin' moral dystopia that is American politics. The appeal to hypocrisy is all about distracting from the issue and argument at hand by calling out hypocrisy in your opponent. And the thing about this one that I think is really interesting is that it can feel like a logical response. And that's the paradox. It feels logical when in reality, logic has nothing to do with feelings.
And don't get me wrong,
literally the last thing I ever want to sound like on this planet is Ben Shapiro with his whole facts don't care about your feelings crap. That's not what I mean. I think emotions are a critical part of the human experience, and there is and should be room in every argument to explore and dissect our emotions as valid responses to what's going on around us. My entire point is that just because something feels vindicating doesn't mean that it's logically sound, and that's where the appeal to hypocrisy comes in. Let's say that you're a teenager and you're feeling rebellious, so you go into your older sibling's bag and you steal some cigarettes and you start smoking one. Your older sibling catches you and they start to lecture you about how gross smoking is, how much it can damage your health, how it can kill you down the line, and how you just absolutely shouldn't do it. I think we're all kind of having the same thought, right? Well, it's super hypocritical of the older sibling who smokes, whose cigarettes you're using, to be sitting there lecturing you about smoking and telling you that you shouldn't do it. So let's go back to the example. You hear your older sibling's lecture and you're pissed, you're outraged. they're being super hypocritical. So you tell them that. How dare you tell me not to smoke when it's something that you do yourself? After all, these are your cigarettes, right? It's an obviously hypocritical thing to do. And you might be right. They are being hypocritical in that situation, but it doesn't take away from the points that they made, because smoking is dangerous. It does cause illness and death according to pretty much every scientific study there is. And the fact that your sibling who's telling you all these things smokes too doesn't change any of that. You pointing out your sibling's hypocrisy does nothing to undermine their argument. If anything, all it does is reinforce that your sibling is right and is failing to take their own sound advice. If someone's making a logical argument that is very much at odds with what they do in practice, it can be really tempting to call them out, and it can feel like their argument is less valid because they're not taking their own advice, right? But the fact of the matter is that your actions have nothing to do with the logics of your argument. That one's a tough one to swallow, at least for me. Next up is the fallacy of sunk costs. This one is what I like to think of as the tragedy of your mid-20s, because I personally see and hear this one all the time, and I think it just gets worse with age, honestly. The fallacy of sunk costs is all about thinking that you should continue on with a decision or a course of life because of the perceived value of the time and energy that you've already put into that decision. So there's a lot of nuance when it comes to this one, and I think it's important to make a distinction right off the bat. It's one thing to love what you do, and I'm not just talking about a career here, I'm talking about whatever it is that you're doing and whatever it is that this applies to. It's one thing to love it and to face moments of demotivation or discouragement, but to continue on with it because you want to see where it goes, because you ultimately enjoy and get some sort of existential value from the energy that you're putting into it. That's just called commitment. But it's another thing entirely to dislike or be completely ambivalent about something you're doing, but to only continue on with it because you feel like you should, because you've already put so much effort or time or money into it. The idea here is, well, tough. You don't like it? You can't turn back now. You already worked so hard for it.
Fallacy.
I think career is the clearest example we can use here, because think about it. How many people do you know who are already really dissatisfied with their careers, who complain about not liking what they do, about feeling just completely uninspired or unmotivated at work all the time? Look, as someone who was a pre-law political science major who now works in marketing and writes fiction, I get it. Don't rational fallacy your way out of happiness. That's it. That's my short soapbox moment for the video. Always gotta have one.
I'm just realizing now that I never really articulated what my point was, but basically my point is I understand how difficult it can be to make a career pivot, especially once you've invested time and effort into either an education or a previous career choice. And don't get me wrong, I know that being able to pursue something new is a huge privilege that not everybody has. But I do think that if you are able to, it's worthwhile considering switching careers or switching specialties if you find yourself dissatisfied with your career. I was convinced I was going to be a lawyer for most of my life, and then I realized shortly after graduating college that there was nothing about actually being a lawyer that I liked other than the idea of it. So I switched to doing something that I love, and I know that's not everyone's reality. I know that everyone has different circumstances and responsibilities, but even if it's a gradual shift, even if you are able to dedicate small amounts of time to pursuing something you love over something that you don't care about or hate, I recommend doing it. And so does logic.
The last fallacy that I kind of want to talk about today is the appeal to authority, which is probably one of the most common and seemingly harmless ones that we see all the time. The appeal to authority is using the opinion or stance of a respected figure in order to justify an argument, even though that figure is completely inexperienced or irrelevant to the subject matter that you're trying to justify. And I think the most classic and kind of easy to spot example of this is the celebrity endorsement. And the thing is that there is a line here, like let's say that a really famous and accomplished makeup artist endorses a makeup brand or a really respected cinematographer endorses a type of lens or camera. A very sound argument could be made that that person is an expert in the field and therefore their endorsement is totally valid, and the decision that you make about the product they're endorsing would be sound if you were to follow their advice, because after all, they're an expert in their field. Let's say I buy a perfume I've never even smelled because a celebrity I love is the face of the brand. Kind of a logical fallacy. Similarly, if I were to buy a Lincoln to drive because Matthew McConaughey is the one in the commercials, first of all, I would have great taste, but second of all, I'd be committing a logical fallacy. The celebrity endorsement is the classic appeal to authority, and sometimes it works because sometimes there is expertise there and the person is well versed in what they're endorsing, but most of the time it's just attaching a face to a brand in order to make sales based on the appeal to authority. And of course, this happens outside of celebrity endorsements. That's kind of one of the most harmless and easy examples to talk about, but it's really common for us to use the opinion of powerful people in order to justify arguments that we're making, even if those powerful people have no expertise whatsoever in the subject matter. And that can be kind of hard to distinguish. Like, for example, taking nutrition advice from your personal trainer can seem relevant because they're really fit, they work in fitness, right? And they know your fitness plan. But unless that trainer is also a registered dietitian, it's an appeal to authority. Taking health advice or medical advice from your favorite holistic health YouTuber can seem like an okay thing to do, because after all, maybe their skin is so glowy or their hair looks amazing or they seem really fit. But unless that YouTuber is also a practicing physician who has expertise in what they're talking about, it's an appeal to authority. It's no secret that our society glamorizes wealth and power and influence, but having wealth, power, influence, or even knowledge in one field doesn't make you an expert in another. And we have to push ourselves to really continue seeing the difference and being really discerning about who it is that we're looking to for advice about things. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I love talking about logical fallacies because I think it's one of those useful things that we can all kind of implement into our lives and hopefully use to become better communicators. There are a lot more logical fallacies that are committed all the time, so if you guys would like for me to keep talking about them, I would love to. Like I kind of hinted at earlier, I'm also working on a video about social media becoming an echo chamber and kind of self-affirming beliefs. So I'm really excited about that. But as always, if there's anything you want me to talk about, please let me know in the comments or message me on Instagram because I love hearing what you think I should talk about. Thank you again for watching. Don't forget to like this video and turn on post notifications if you want, and subscribe if you want. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!